She was just another passenger in line, or so they thought. A black woman traveling alone on a first-class ticket until the staff decided she didn't belong there. What started as a routine boarding flight turned into 30 minutes of humiliation and… Before we start, leave a comment and indicate which city you're sharing from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Airports have a way of showing you who people really are. I wasn't thinking about that as I walked into Terminal C with my garment bag and carry-on, headed for a first-class seat I'd booked weeks ago. I had a meeting across the country that could decide the future of my company. My hair was pulled back, my suit charcoal and simple. No logos, no entourage. Just me. I took my place in the priority boarding line, the one marked First, Business, Elite, and felt the shift before anyone spoke. The woman at the podium gave me the kind of smile that isn't a smile at all. "This line is for our premier guests," she said, scanning me from shoes to hair. "General boarding is over there by the wall." Her tone made general sound like exile. I held out my ID and boarding pass. "First class." "I'm early." She hesitated, then looked again, as if the name might change if she stared hard enough. "We've had a lot of fraud lately," she added, almost gently, as if that made it less insulting. "Sometimes people use names that aren't theirs." A couple behind me stopped whispering about their vacation and started whispering about me. A man in a blazer adjusted his phone like he might be recording. The air shifted thick, sharp. "Would you mind stepping aside?" she said, already calling over a supervisor. He arrived with the polished courtesy of someone who's made a career out of control. "We just need additional verification," he said. "It's probably nothing." They walked me to a glass-partitioned area and began the secondary screening: hair, hands, laptop, every zipper checked. The woman running it apologized in a voice that didn't match the way her eyes moved over me. I could see the supervisor outside, watching, not the process, but me. When they finished, he came back with another question. "Your ticket's linked to a corporate profile," he said. "What's your employer's name?" "Apex Meridian Group." He typed it slowly, like it was a test. "And your department?" "Owner." He smiled like it was a joke. It wasn't. Before I could say more, another agent approached, saying there was a situation at another gate involving my name. The supervisor's face flickered with something between confusion and unease. He asked me to wait just a moment. I stood there under the bright lights, the boarding time ticking down, feeling the eyes on me. I could have ended it all with one phone call, one sentence that would change the air instantly. But I didn't, because I wanted to see just how far they'd go when they thought I was nobody. And I was about to find out. They led me not to a lounge, but to a small conference room that smelled like paper and lemon cleaner, a box with glass on 3 sides so everyone outside could pretend not to stare. The supervisor sat across from me with a binder of policies he hadn't read since training week, and a duty manager in a navy suit hovered by the door as if proximity counted as authority. The podium woman stood at the corner pretending to take notes. Her face had the set look of someone who wanted the room to agree with the story already in her head. I placed my boarding pass and ID on the table and folded my hands, calm enough to make their confidence wobble. "We appreciate your cooperation," the supervisor started, voice warm, edges sharp. "There were a few inconsistencies with your reservation, and with increased fraud, you understand we must be thorough." "I understand thorough," I said. "I built a company on it." He glanced at my name again, then at the duty manager, then at my shoes as if leather could confess. "This ticket appears linked to a corporate account requiring elevated authorization," he continued. "According to our system, the traveler's employer has not verified travel privileges for," he checked the screen, as if surprised the name hadn't changed, "for Ms. L. A. Bradford." "Scan the QR on the bottom right," I said. "Your vendor's escalation line will call you back. It's faster than guessing." "We don't escalate without cause," the duty manager cut in, smooth and certain. "And cause would be if you could provide your department." "Procurement? Operations?" "Executive assistant too." "Owner," I said again, not louder, just undeniable. The podium woman exhaled through her smile. The duty manager wrote the word down as if it were a joke he'd explain to me later. A young agent arrived with my carry-on, zippers flagged with stickers as if labels could make suspicion look scientific. "We need to confirm contents," he announced to the room rather than to me. He lifted my laptop, swabbed it, lifted my notebook, hesitated at the tabs. "What's this folder?" "Schedules, liabilities, signatures," I said. "Tonight's work." He peered at the letterhead without reading it, nodded like real comprehension, and set it down harder than necessary. Outside the glass, 2 security officers pretended to check their radios while keeping me centered in their line of sight. A woman in line raised her phone timidly. When our eyes met, she lowered it and looked ashamed. I held the young agent's gaze until his hands steadied. The supervisor cleared his throat. "We will also need to verify the loyalty number associated with your ticket," he said. "It's attached to a corporate master file. Those are rarely used by individual travelers." "Rarely," I agreed. "Not never." "Do you have a corporate contact we can call?" the duty manager asked, already pleased with his solution. "Someone who can vouch for your employment?" "I have many," I said. "But I'm more interested in whether you will use the tools in your own hands." Silence clicked into place. He scanned the code at last, reluctant as a confession, listened to the automated menu, entered his agent ID. The line jumped immediately to a human. His posture changed. Yes, I have a traveler flagged as L.A. Bradford. No, not employee. The profile lists." "I see." His eyes flicked to me, then dropped. He covered the receiver. "They're asking for an executive passphrase," he said, new carefulness folding his voice. Omega Blue. The podium woman stopped writing. The young agent swallowed. The supervisor reached for the phone like it might absolve him by touch alone. "We don't normally." "You've said normally a lot," I answered. "Today is not that." He repeated the phrase into the receiver, listened, went still. The duty manager tried to recover the room with a smile that never arrived. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding," he offered, like a bandage tossed from a distance. "It is," I said. "Just not the way you think." A knock at the glass. A thin-tide runner from the adjacent gate leaned in, breathless. "We've got a lockdown at 24B, he said to the supervisor, ignoring me because the habit was muscle-deep. "Passenger tried to use a tarmac clearance badge. Says she's late to an operations audit and that will regret delaying her. Name matches this one." He tilted his tablet so my initials stared back at the room. The supervisor looked at me as if I had multiplied. The duty manager straightened his jacket as if fabric could be a shield. I watched the seconds slide off my boarding time like rain down glass and felt the familiar choice settle in my chest. End it now and take the small, private victory, or let it widen. Let everyone see the full shape of what they'd built with their certainty. I slid a white card from my wallet and set it beside my ID. "You can keep performing," I said quietly, "or you can pick up that card and do your job the way your training says you should when the customer you can't imagine turns out to be the one holding the floor together." No one moved. Outside, the phones came up again, hungry for a story. Inside, the duty manager reached, finally, and the embossed watermark rose under the conference light like a tide they hadn't expected. He dialed, stumbled over the greeting, spoke the passphrase, listened. When he hung up, his voice had learned a new shape. "Ms. Bradford," he said, choosing each syllable like a step onto ice, "our director would like a word, immediately." "I imagine he would," I said, rising, adjusting the cuff I hadn't touched all morning. "Let's not keep him waiting." And as the door opened and the corridor cleared in that quiet, volatile way crowds do when they sense a turn coming, I felt the whole terminal lean toward us, toward the moment when names meet deeds and the story can't pretend anymore. The director of terminal operations didn't waste time on pleasantries. He stood when I entered, motioned to the head of the table like he was doing me a favor. His smile was strained, the kind you wear when you know your hands are already dirty. The supervisor sat 2 chairs down, pretending to be small. The duty manager avoided my eyes. The woman in the black blazer stood behind me now, not saying a word, as though she wasn't sure whether she belonged here or not. "Ms. Bradford," the director began, "I want to start by saying we value every passenger's experience. If any of our procedures have caused you discomfort. I cut in. "You've detained me for 30 minutes without cause, flagged my name twice, questioned my right to board a flight I paid for, and now you've involved the airport police. That's not discomfort. That's discrimination dressed up as procedure. His jaw flexed, but he kept his voice even. We follow the protocols provided by our security partners. If you were flagged, there must have been a reason. There was, I said, leaning forward. You saw my face, decided it didn't fit your idea of who sits in first class, and everything after that was theater. The silence that followed was heavy enough to hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights. The director cleared his throat. Regardless of perception, we still have an identity verification to complete. If you can produce secondary proof. I slid the white card across the table. Call the number. Use the passphrase. Then we can talk about verification. He hesitated, just long enough for the supervisor to glance at him, just long enough for me to see the conflict. Then he picked it up and stepped aside, speaking into the phone in a low voice. I watched his posture change before he even hung up. Shoulders squared, spine stiff, a flicker of unease in his eyes. When he returned to the table, his tone had shifted. Miss Bradford, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. Your credentials have been confirmed at the highest level. Not a misunderstanding, I said. A choice. And we're not done talking about it. Before he could respond, the door opened. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped in, his badge clipped to his belt, his expression unreadable. Miss Bradford, he said, I've been sent by the vendor responsible for this terminal's operations. I think you and I need a private conversation. I stood. Good. Because I was just about to explain to your clients how much this little incident is going to cost them. The director swallowed hard, and for the first time since the morning began, I saw something new in his face. Fear. The man in the charcoal suit didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped aside from the table, gesturing toward the hallway with the quiet authority of someone used to walking into messes and cleaning them up before anyone noticed. I followed, my heels clicking on the polished tile, every step a reminder that I wasn't here to make peace. We stopped in a smaller, windowless office down the corridor. The walls were lined with filing cabinets and locked drawers. The man closed the door and set his phone face down on the desk before he spoke. My name is Daniel Vega, he said. I'm with Solon Systems, the vendor contracted to manage your airport's operations. He straightened his tie, studying me as if confirming for himself what he'd been told. First, let me say that your escalation was received, clearly. Omega Blue is only used in extreme situations. When I heard it attached to your name, I left my meeting mid-sentence. Then you already know what happened, I said. I know the outline, he replied. What I need from you are the specifics, every word, every look, every unnecessary delay. The director out there? He's been a problem before. But the difference this time is that you are not just any passenger. You hold an executive client contract with us. That means his problem just became mine. I crossed my arms. And what exactly happens when a problem becomes yours? He didn't smile. We cut it out. Entire departments have been replaced for less. But I want to be thorough so that when the investigation hits, there's no doubt. I leaned against the desk. Good. Because this wasn't just mishandling. It was profiling. They saw me, decided I didn't fit their idea of premiere, and the rest was theater to justify it. Every question, every unnecessary call, every smirk, it was all meant to remind me I was somewhere they thought I didn't belong. Daniel nodded slowly. Then here's what I propose. You file a formal incident report. I'll make sure it bypasses the usual black hole and lands directly in the vendor's compliance division. We'll pull camera footage, audio recordings, internal chat logs. And when we have it, you get to decide whether this ends with terminations or with a public apology from the terminal itself. I studied him for a moment. And if I say both? His expression didn't change. Then it's both. There was a knock at the door. The black blazer woman, the one who'd spoken my name at the gate, stepped in, looking uncertain. Miss Bradford, she said softly, you should know, some of the staff are already talking. They're saying you were difficult. They're building a version where you're the problem. I almost laughed. Of course they are. Daniel glanced at me. Then we'd better move fast. Once their story spreads, cleanup gets harder. I straightened, already feeling the shift. This was no longer about defending myself. It was about showing everyone here what happens when they choose the wrong story. And I was going to make sure they never forgot it. By the time we returned to the conference room, the air had shifted. Word travels fast in places like airports, not through official memos, but in the way people glance at each other, the way whispers ripple just under the hum of announcements. The director stood now, his binder gone, his smile forced into something smaller. The supervisor sat with his hands folded tightly on the table. The duty manager's pen tapped once, twice, then stopped when he realized I was watching. Daniel walked in first, placing a slim laptop on the table. "Before we proceed, we're going to watch something," he said, his voice flat, almost bored. "Security footage from the last 40 minutes. Every interaction with Ms. Bradford, from the podium to this room." The screen came alive with crisp images. There I was, stepping into the priority line. The pause in the podium woman's smile. The sidelong look she gave the supervisor before even scanning my boarding pass. The unnecessary call to verify what she already knew. Then the glassbox screening, the prolonged bag search, the smirk exchanged over my folder of documents. It was all there, silent, undeniable. And it played with timestamps in the corner, proving just how much of my morning had been wasted on prejudice dressed as protocol. The director shifted uncomfortably. "We can't ignore context. Security concerns." Daniel cut him off. "The context here is that you profiled an executive client whose company holds the systems contract for this terminal. And you did it in full view of passengers and staff. That's not just bad optics. That's breach of service obligations." I let the words hang for a moment before leaning forward. "My name isn't just on the reservation. It's on the contract that pays for the software keeping your gates open, your belts moving, your scanners talking to each other. And today, you've made it very clear what you think of the people who keep this place running." The podium woman looked down. The supervisor's jaw tightened. No one spoke. Daniel closed the laptop with a decisive click. "Here's what's going to happen. Effective immediately, a vendor-led investigation will begin. All relevant staff will be suspended pending outcome. The client, Ms. Bradford, will receive the formal right to determine whether terminations follow. And given the contractual breach, she is within her rights to demand a public apology from this terminal's management." The duty manager's face went pale. "Public apology?" "Yes," I said. "On your website, in your press releases, and in the same terminal where this happened. Every traveler should see it." Daniel glanced at me. "Anything else?" I looked around the room, making sure to meet each pair of eyes. "Yes. I want the people who didn't look away when they saw what was happening to me promoted. I know who they are." I nodded toward the black blazer woman standing in the doorway, her eyes wide. The director swallowed hard. "We'll arrange it." "Good," I said, standing. "Then we're done here." But we weren't. Not even close. Because the real reckoning was still to come, and it wouldn't happen behind closed doors. The next morning, I walked into the terminal not as a passenger, but as the owner of the contract everyone had been whispering about since yesterday. Daniel was waiting at the VIP entrance, tablet in hand, the kind of smile on his face that meant paperwork had already been signed and delivered. "Suspension notices went out at 6 a.m., he said as we walked. Podium lead, supervisor, duty manager, all pulled from the schedule. Security agent from the glass box, too. They've been escorted off the premises." "Escorted," I repeated. His smile didn't falter. "Policy for personnel under investigation. Same as they made you do, only they don't get to come back through the gate." We stepped into the staff hallway behind the main concourse. It was buzzing with the quiet chaos of people adjusting to a sudden power shift. Some looked curious, others nervous, but many, more than I expected, met my eyes with something like relief. The black blazer woman, whose name I now knew was Sophia Grant, stood near the break room with a sealed envelope in her hand. When she saw me, she straightened. "They told me to report to the passenger services office," she said carefully. "Said I was getting reassigned." I glanced at Daniel. He nodded. "You're not being reassigned," I told her. "You're being promoted. Effective immediately, you're the new floor coordinator for premium boarding. Higher pay, better schedule. And a seat at every security briefing from now on." Her mouth fell open. Why, me? Because you were the only one who spoke up when my name was being dragged through the mud, I said. You saw what was happening and you didn't look away. That matters. Her fingers tightened around the envelope. Thank you, she said softly, like she was afraid the words might break. We moved on, past clusters of employees who suddenly found the floor or their paperwork very interesting. Daniel stopped at the operations board, where schedules and assignments for the week were pinned. Half a dozen names had red tags next to them. Those are your suspensions, he said. We've already secured replacements from another terminal. HR will handle the rest, but I'll be honest, your decision on their future is going to carry more weight than anyone else's. I studied the list. These were the same people who'd smirked, stalled, and whispered while I was being held at the gate. Their absence was already making the place feel lighter. But this wasn't about removing them. It was about what came next. Keep them off the floor, I said. But before any final decision, I want a meeting with every department head. We're going to talk about what happened and how it's never going to happen again. Daniel raised an eyebrow. A reform plan? I smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. No, a reckoning. And as I stepped back into the main terminal, I knew the next time I stood in front of these people, it wouldn't be in a closed room. It would be in front of the entire airport. 3 days later, the conference hall above the main concourse was packed. I could feel the heat of bodies, the restless shift of weight, the undercurrent of quiet voices wondering why they'd been pulled from their posts in the middle of the morning rush. The director sat in the front row, pale and still. Behind him, the suspended staff stared at the floor or fixed their eyes somewhere over my head. Sophia stood to my left, Daniel to my right, both silent but steady. When I stepped up to the microphone, the room went still. Not silent, still, like the air before a storm. My name, I began, is L.A. Bradford. I am the owner of Apex Meridian Group, the company that keeps this terminal running. Every boarding pass scanned, every conveyor belt moving, every security system talking to the next, that's us. Which means when I walk into this building, I am not just a passenger. I am your client. A ripple moved through the crowd. Recognition. Regret. A few glances toward the director, who kept his eyes fixed on the carpet. Last week, I continued, I was stopped at your premium boarding gate. Not because my documents were out of order. Not because there was a security concern. But because someone looked at me and decided I didn't belong there. From that moment on, every decision made by your team, every delay, every question, was designed to reinforce that judgment. I turned toward the projection screen. Daniel tapped his tablet and the footage we'd reviewed in the closed room began to play. Gasps, mutters, the occasional uncomfortable cough. The smirk over my documents. The slow walk to the glass box. The exchange of knowing looks. When the clip ended, I let the silence hang. This, I said finally, is not procedure. This is discrimination. And it happened on your watch. The director shifted as though to speak, but Daniel's glance shut him down. So here's what's going to change, I said, scanning the room. Effective immediately, this terminal will undergo a full review of its training protocols, its hiring practices, and its accountability measures. All staff will attend bias and anti-discrimination training, not a slideshow, but real, interactive work. Those who fail to complete it to standard will not return to the floor. Promotions will go to those who demonstrate courage and fairness under pressure, people like Sophia Grant, who stood up for a passenger when it cost her nothing, but could have cost her everything. Sophia's name drew a murmur, her face flushing under the attention. And for those suspended, I added, your futures here will depend entirely on whether you can own what happened and prove you've changed. Not to me. To the passengers you serve. I stepped back, letting the weight of the word settle. This terminal runs because of people. If you can't respect every person who walks through these doors, then you have no place here. That's not a threat. It's a fact. I left the stage without looking back, but I could feel it, the shift. The kind that doesn't fade when the meeting ends. And I knew the next time I walked through this terminal, no one would dare look at me the way they had that morning. Because now, they knew exactly who I was. By the end of the week, the story had already escaped the walls of the terminal. I hadn't planned a media release. I didn't need to. Passengers had recorded enough on their phones to piece together the humiliation, the conference room, and finally, the all-hands meeting where I'd said the words out loud, "This is discrimination." The clips spread fast, feeding on that irresistible mix of outrage and reversal, the unknown passenger turning out to be the one holding the contract that kept the place alive. My phone lit up with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Some were just offering congratulations. Others were telling me their own stories, moments when they'd been made to feel small, invisible, suspect, for no reason but the color of their skin or the shape of their name. Many of them ended with the same sentence: "I wish I could have done what you did." The vendor's compliance team moved faster than I'd ever seen them work. Policies were rewritten, security briefings restructured, and staff rotations adjusted, so no one held unchecked control over premium access points. Daniel sent me a final report with a neat summary: 17 personnel changes, 2 terminations, 4 demotions, 5 promotions. Sophia's name was at the top of the latter list, circled in blue. But the real change was harder to quantify. Other terminals under the same vendor began reviewing their own protocols, some before they were even told to. I got a call from a CEO in Denver asking if I'd speak to his staff. Then one from Chicago. Then a chain of regional airports that wanted to adopt the Apex model for passenger equity training. It wasn't lost on me that I was being celebrated now for a fight I'd been forced into. People liked a clean story: victim becomes victor, problem fixed in 3 acts. But I knew better. The fix was never just one moment. It was what came after, when the cameras turned away, and you had to make sure no one quietly rebuilt the same problem in a different corner. I accepted some of the invitations, turned down others. What mattered most to me was ensuring the reforms here stuck. I started dropping into the terminal unannounced, sometimes through the front doors, sometimes through the staff corridors. Each time, I caught the faint pause in people's movements, the quick straightening of posture, the effort to meet my eyes without flinching. It wasn't fear anymore. It was awareness. And yet, I knew there was one step left, the one that would lock this change in place for good. The public apology. It was scheduled for Monday morning, right in the heart of the concourse. The same place I'd been stopped, the same gate where it all began. And I intended to make sure that when the words were spoken, they wouldn't just be for me. They'd be for everyone who'd ever been told, without a word, "You don't belong here." Monday morning, the terminal's heart was beating faster than usual. You could feel it in the way people lingered near the premium gate, pretending to check departure boards while really waiting for the show. News crews had set up their cameras beside the moving walkway. Security officers were stationed at every entrance, their expressions carefully neutral. I stood to the side with Daniel and Sophia, watching the director of terminal operations step up to the microphone. His suit was perfectly pressed, his voice perfectly measured, but I could see the effort in the way his hands gripped the podium. On behalf of the management team of Terminal C, he began, "I wish to address an incident that occurred here last week. A valued client, Ms. L. A. Bradford, was subjected to treatment that did not meet our standards of service, professionalism, or basic human respect. For this, we offer our unreserved apology." His words echoed through the space, bouncing off glass and steel. People stopped walking. A mother with 2 children on her hip paused mid-step. Even the staff behind the podium stood still. "We recognize," he continued, "that discrimination, whether intentional or not, has no place in our terminal. The events of that day have prompted an immediate review of our policies, staff training, and accountability measures. Several personnel changes have been made, and further actions will follow. We are committed to ensuring that no passenger, regardless of race, gender, or background, will be made to feel they do not belong here." Daniel gave me a small nod. This was my moment. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the polished floor, and took the microphone from the director's hands. "I appreciate the words," I said, letting my gaze sweep the crowd. "But words alone don't fix what happened, not to me, and not to the countless people who've experienced the same treatment without anyone here to film it." I paused. The silence was thick, expectant. What happened to me wasn't just a bad decision by a few people. It was a reflection of a culture that allows certain faces to be questioned before they're welcomed. That culture ends now. Not because I own a company. Not because I have a contract with this terminal. But because no one should have to prove they belong where they've already earned the right to stand. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Sophia's hands were clasped tight at her waist, her eyes bright. This isn't just my win, I finished. It's yours, if you make it so. Hold each other accountable. See the people in front of you. And when you see injustice, speak. Even if it's just a whisper at first. Whispers can become storms. I handed the microphone back and stepped away. The cameras followed me, but I wasn't walking for them. I was walking for the next person who would stand in this terminal with nothing but their boarding pass and the belief that it should be enough. 2 weeks later, the airport felt different. Not perfect, it never would be, but different. You could see it in the way staff greeted passengers without scanning them up and down first. You could hear it in the conversations, quieter, more respectful, like everyone was aware they were being measured by more than just efficiency. The apology had gone viral. Clips of me at the microphone were replayed on news channels, discussed on podcasts, dissected in comment threads that stretched into the thousands. But the part that stayed with me wasn't the media frenzy, it was the emails and letters. From a woman in Atlanta who'd been stopped 3 times in one trip because her look didn't match her ID photo. From a young man in Dallas who said he'd watched his father be pulled aside at every checkpoint for as long as he could remember. From a grandmother in Chicago who wrote, "You made them say out loud what they've done to me in silence for years." Those voices mattered more than the headlines. They reminded me that what happened in Terminal C wasn't a single wound. It was part of a pattern that had been cutting people for decades. And patterns didn't break themselves. I stayed involved. I sat in on training sessions, not as a silent observer, but as someone willing to stop the presentation and say, explain how that would work in practice. I pushed for anonymous passenger feedback kiosks at every gate. I insisted that promotions were tied to performance in fairness audits, not just efficiency metrics. And yet, there were moments when I thought about that first morning, the podium woman's half smile, the supervisor's careful tone, the weight of all those watching eyes, and wondered how many times this would happen again in some other airport, to someone who didn't have my leverage. That question stayed with me like a stone in my pocket. On my next flight, I boarded without incident. No sideways looks, no whispered calls to supervisors. Sophia was at the gate, scanning boarding passes with her new badge clipped proudly to her blazer. When she saw me, she smiled a real smile and said, "Safe travels, Ms. Bradford." It was such a small thing, but it was proof. I found my seat, settled my bag, and looked out at the runway. The engines roared to life, and I thought about the irony that it took being humiliated to make my presence visible. That people listened because I had power when they should have listened because I had truth. I didn't kid myself. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning, and beginnings are fragile. But maybe, just maybe, someone watching that day would remember and speak and stand when it was their turn to face the gate. And if they didn't? Well, I'd still be here. Because some fights don't end at boarding. They follow you wherever you land.